right, good morning. Might as well get started. My name is Jameson MacArthur, and I'm going to be talking about responsive web design, some techniques for building out large-scale web apps. I'm mainly going to be talking about CSS architecture, overall app performance, and CSS maintenance. Most of the things I learned that I'm going to be talking about, I learned in the past 15 months working on probably the most challenging project in my career at LockerDome.com. For those of you not familiar with LockerDome, it's a social media website. It's kind of centered around things that you're interested in rather than who you know. And we get a lot of traffic. We get over 50 million hits a month. It's fully responsive down to about 300 pixels wide. And it's all built on a single code base. So it's kind of a lot to manage. As you can see, we have a pretty small team. Only like 5 of those guys are even developers. It's pretty small. And I'm actually the only CSS guy on the team. During the time that we launched, we actually worked pretty much nonstop. Like one guy legendarily slept in the office for a full 3 months, just full on hardcore. And we actually, during the time that we launched it, we decided to not shave until it was done, which was a little scary. That's actually what I looked like by the end of it. Kind of had like a old prospector vibe happening. But we did it, and this is what it looks like today. As you can see, it's kind of fully fluid, fluctuates between column numbers, switches out headers, fully fluid and responsive. So let's talk about CSS architecture first. This is a picture of the Infinity Room at the House on the Rock in Wisconsin. The Infinity Room is actually kind of a feat of architecture. It extends 218 feet over the forest floor, and without a single piece of support underneath it. So it's like a freestanding kind of thing. And sometimes we can end up writing our CSS that way. We can just keep adding and adding, and it just gets completely out of control, and you get all this spaghetti code. So that's not the right way to do it. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is Facebook, and the text right there, the gray text, the callout text, they actually use, okay, so they turn it gray here. They add a hex color. They add the same hex color again. And then they add the same 3 style sheets, just kind of duplicated. Nothing against Facebook. I mean, I'd be afraid too if I had a user base that was like terrified of change. But it can get out of control pretty easy. So what you can do against that is come up with a plan. You got to have like a methodology. This guy, Ben Frayne, actually wrote an article about this. It's called FUN, is the acronym. And it's pretty straightforward. So the F is for flat selector hierarchy, which basically just means don't nest too much. Don't like, you got to keep things modular like these Tetris blocks. It's got to be easy to stack, take components, put them anywhere you want to, and just, you need to nest sometimes, but not all the time. Utility classes and namespace components. So let me show you an example. If that Tetris block was a component, you could use L as the namespace, block as the component name, and then you can add orange as a utility class on top of it. So then for this pink block over here, it's another L block, and then you just use a pink utility class. So it's kind of a real simplistic way to visualize how to structure it along these lines. Oh, also I want to mention, I'm going to send out these slides after the presentation. I'll tweet them out, and I'll have links to all these articles and stuff in there. So should be good. Okay, you should be pre-processing your CSS. I feel like that's kind of, it probably goes without saying these days, but it's super important. Chris Coyer even said it, and I totally agree with it. So here's the recipe I like to use, Sass, and then I use Bourbon. It's kind of like an alternative to Compass. It's kind of a little more lightweight, a little more vanilla syntax. It makes things kind of easy, and that's what I prefer. But as long as you use something like this, less Sass, whatever, you'll be in much better shape. So here's another aspect of design. It's called atomic design. Written by Brad Frost is the guy who came up with it, and it's a pretty simple concept. Basically, you have small atoms, like your like smaller components of the site. Those bond together to make molecules, then organisms, then pages, etc. I use kind of an atomic-ish design where, so here's my Sass project. The atoms are things like paragraphs, headers, kind of real simple elements. The molecules, so like forms, buttons, etc. And then organisms, you start to get kind of bigger groupings of pieces, like the navigation, the header, stuff like that. And then full page styles. Sometimes you need like full styles for your profile pages, about us page, stuff like that. And then I like to have a global folder where I keep all of my mix-ins, variables, kind of anything that is going to be shared across every aspect of the site. And then vendor-specific folder. This is where I like to keep. This is where I stash the bourbon. This is where you keep like your normalized file. You can keep anything that you don't want to like go back and change later. It's kind of a good way to kind of separate that stuff out. So the benefit of Sass is that you can then compile all these. So I import all the Sass partials into like a same name file, import all those into the style sheet, and then you have a single network request. So it makes things a lot easier to on the page load, and also you can organize it however you want to, compile it, compact the hell out of it, and you have like this nice, neat kind of file at the end of it. Oh, part has crashed. Okay, so another example of what you can pull off with this kind of a structure is if you have all your main core site styles going to the style.css file, then you have all these fancy kind of animations throughout the site, but actually they only appear on a few pages. What you can do then is take those animations, compile them down to a separate style sheet, and only serve that style sheet to those specific pages. That way, you can keep your core site code base kind of a lot more lightweight. Let's see if I can get rid of this. Okay, media queries. So media queries are kind of the bread and butter of responsive design, obviously. I mean, you need them to do pretty much anything. So some of the principles I like to follow are to use mix-ins for them, nest them, and use a mobile-first approach. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is kind of the structure that we use at LockerDome. It is the mix-in that we use for media queries. I basically set up a target, so then you pass in the number of the target, and it then increments with the width of the page, or any other height of the page, min width, max width, stuff like that. So then you take that mix-in, and you include it into you can nest it within the selector, so in this case a column. And I'm also using a mobile-first approach here, which with mix-ins actually means that you start with a really light style, and then you tack on heavier styles as you go. So as the site gets wider, it gets extra styles. That way your minimum, your smallest target, gets less styles, which is good for mobile devices and stuff like that. Sorry. All right, let's talk about performance. Web apps have to be almost as good as native apps. They really have, there's a lot of pressure on them. So it's important to keep them slick and smooth like this Jaguar concept car. They got to be just nice and fast and good looking. So I'm going to talk about scrolling performance and speed performance, because those are particular challenges for me at LockerDome. So with desktop scrolling, there are some, this is just Chrome DevTools right here. And there's a rendering tab that you can use. A lot of the other presenters have mentioned this, so it's really a good feature. You can actually turn on this little graph that will show you the page repaint time. The repaint time is basically the time that it takes to apply all the CSS to the page as you scroll. So it has to keep adding the styles. So this is where it really shows how important it is to have lightweight styles. The graph, you want it to be low, obviously. You want it to be not too much paint time. And I found that, and kind of an anecdote of this is, I found that by toggling the selectors, if I turned off the box shadows, we had like this almost imperceptible box shadow around each thing, it dropped our graph time by 50%. So there was an immediate, like noticeable improvement in the scrolling performance, which was a huge win. Okay, phones, on the other hand, are a little bit of a different story. On your phone, it's a lot more complicated to troubleshoot stuff. So let me share some of the things that I kind of came up with that helped us improve our performance. You need to test on actual devices. It kind of goes without saying, but you need to just feel it. You need to feel how good that performance is. Some things I found to avoid: fixed position, JavaScript touch events, and scrolling on the body. The fixed position and touch events kind of add a little bit of extra jankiness that it's really hard to get rid of, especially in a large, like tall page. And scrolling on body is tough on iOS because you can't get the good momentum scrolling thing happening. So it makes it kind of difficult. It sounds impossible, but you can pull it off. Let me show you. This is what we have at LockerDome. It's kind of it took us a while to come up with this, and it's kind of not real obvious that it would work, but it seems to work out pretty well so far. And the great thing is it's a consistent style for every single device that it's served to. So what we have here is a scroller div. The scroller is actually absolutely positioned from the top and the bottom, and then with just 100% width. And it's got overflow scrolling touch on it, so anywhere you scroll, you got this nice kind of smooth scrolling, especially on mobile devices. And then any div outside of that, you take 100% height overflow hidden, and that way everything is just kind of out of the way. So you can control where your scroller is. And if you notice the scroll bars there on the GIF there actually don't go all the way to the top. They go right under the header and to the bottom. So it has this real kind of app-like kind of feel to it. All right, now let's talk about speed for a second. 100 milliseconds is a significant number because it's the time in which a human being perceives something as being instantaneous. It sounds like you have a lot of time to work with there, but it's actually unfortunate because of, as most of you probably know, the delay on mobile devices have an inherent 300 millisecond delay because they need to check for pinching and zooming and to make sure people aren't trying to resize their browser. So there are some workarounds for this. This is the meta viewport tag system that we have set up at LockerDome. What you can do is basically just disable the zooming, and some browsers will recognize that and get rid of that delay. Unfortunately, it's like Chrome in Android, so it's not a ton of benefit. But eventually, hopefully, more will start to enable this feature. Another solution for this is fast click. When I found fast click, it was just this magical. I was so excited about it. I applied it to the site. Everything was instantaneous. It felt so much more responsive. I was super excited. So what fast click does is actually uses JavaScript touch events to kind of bypass that 300 milliseconds. But if you notice what I said earlier about JavaScript touch events, they add jankiness. If you have any kind of height on your scroller at all, you see like this noticeable lag and stuff. So that didn't work out. It was kind of a rough day. We had to just disable fast click entirely. And I did find, however, that if you apply it anywhere outside of the scroller, you're fine. So like the site header, you can have nice, responsive, super fast features there. Another aspect of speed is just the page load time. The space between the blue lines there is called the critical path. That's the time that it takes the browser to render anything at all. So as you can see, the stuff that happens in that time frame, it's really important to not have a lot there. Those purple lines in that space are basically all of the site's JavaScript and CSS files. So the browser's waiting for all that stuff to happen before it can show anything to user at all. So what you can do is kind of reduce file size. You can defer some of that stuff till after the page is loaded. But mainly, it's just kind of a good way to illustrate you need to keep your file size down. OK, so finally, let's talk about CSS maintenance. When you have a site of any size at all, you're going to have a ton of CSS. You're going to have so much CSS that it's hard to manage all that. Some things you can do is delete any unused code. You can kind of do audits, go through the stuff, delete anything you can find that you're not using anymore, trim it down, do overall cleanup. You can consolidate selectors where if you're like stacking selectors, a lot of times you can end up doing that. That's going to just double the amount of the output of the CSS. So what you can do is just apply a single class name to a few elements, And that way, you just have your size of your file, and it really kind of helps things along that way. And variables. Anything you can use as a variable just keeps your sanity. I mean, it just makes things so much easier that way. OK, when you have this much CSS in Sass files, you're going to have a really long compile time. I used, so we have about a dozen different style sheets that kind of output all to different places at LockerDome. I've used CodeKit to compile. I've used grunt contrib Sass. I've used just straight up command line compiling. Everything was taking over 30 seconds to load. Just a crazy amount of time. I mean, you save something and then you just wait for a while, and it was completely unbearable. So what I found is grunt-sass. It kind of ties into libsass. It's based on C++ rather than Ruby, and they can get around some of those obstacles with compiling. So switching to this, I was actually able to bring our compile time down to about 1 second, which was just the best day of my life. It was just amazing. So don't be afraid of grunt, by the way, because it can save you a lot of time with some of these back-end processes. I know it's kind of like this demonic-looking boar with his eyes rolled back in his head. It's a little scary, but it's really not too bad. I mean, you can actually set up a dev environment for it, a distribution environment, and kind of put different settings on those. So your dev environment, you can have source maps, which makes it really easy to troubleshoot. Your dev, you can just compress the hell out of it so that the final result is really small. So very beneficial there. OK, the last thing I want to show you guys is, we got time, is our, this is our style guide that I set up for LockerDome. It's kind of a simple thing. It's basically just an index of all our components. And then you have a preview of the component. And then you have like a snippet of the markup that it takes to create that component. So you can really kind of visualize how everything's kind of modular that way. And I definitely recommend setting something like this up. What I did also is, on the bottom, I set up panes where you can just paste markup in, and then you can see the live preview of what that's going to look like as you set it up. So like our creative director uses this and just kind of comes up with quick mock-ups and says, OK, here's what we need on the site. And you know it's using existing components, and you know it's tying in with site styles. This is actually a living style guide, so it's pulling in sites straight from LockerDome right here. And you can really see exactly how stuff's going to look. So I definitely recommend setting up some sort of a style guide like this so you can kind of visualize your overall site as a whole. And that is actually it. That's all I have for you guys. This is actually just something I created on my own. Yeah, I just kind of just built it up just using the site's code and stuff. Yeah, so I have a few minutes for questions, I think, if anyone has questions. Yeah.
How does that whole atomic CSS work with something like, say, web components, where it's obviously a very different kind of way of structuring your web?
The thing I like about the question is how can the atomic CSS tie in with web components? The thing I like about atomic CSS is it's more of a concept, the way I kind of visualize it. It's flexible based on the project. So if you have a project where you can just kind of vary it based on needs. But as long as you can visualize stuff being smaller components that bond together to create bigger components, I think it can work in any kind of situation. Yeah, go ahead.
So let's suppose you have to use a fixed position because the engineering requires it. So one of the issues that I encountered is that when you have a search bar, a search in that menu bar and it's fixed, on the iPad, when you click on it, then it resets the position back to the top. Do you have any idea of fixing that?
Yeah, that's very brutal. I've totally fought that battle many times. The question is, how do you use fixed position and then like a search bar or something? The keyboard just mangles everything up all the time. That's why I found that just if you can avoid fixed position overall, that's the ideal. And we've actually managed to do it. I don't have any place on LockerDome on the mobile view that uses fixed positioning. It's all, anything that needs to be fixed to the top or bottom, what you do with the system that I have for the scroller is have the distance from the top or bottom and have any of those other elements outside of there. So if you have a header that has a search bar in it, you can actually take that header, put it outside of the scroller, and you don't have to do any kind of positioning on it at all. It just kind of stays there. It makes things kind of feel a lot more stable when you're scrolling too. Anyone have anything else? Yeah.
They make a change in the style guide and updates on the site. Is that living, or is it more business?
It's more on the other. It's taking styles from the site. So if I change a style on the site, I'm going to see the impact on the style guide. Yeah. So it's actually helped me come up with a lot of fixes for stuff because I can just kind of scroll through the style guide and see if anything looks broken. If it's broken there, it's going to be broken on the site. So it's kind of good for troubleshooting. Yeah, go ahead.
You didn't mention responsive images. What approach are you taking for responsive images and
What kind of technique do I use for responsive images? Lots of them. There's sometimes I use background images where I have a percentage width on the div, and then if you do 0 height and a percentage padding, like 50% padding, you can maintain an aspect ratio for that. And then you do the background image with background cover or contain based on your needs, and you can kind of get a real flexible kind of grid system going there. That's one thing that I've found to be pretty helpful. But a lot of times you'll just use an image tag straight up and just kind of percentage width, and sometimes that works. There's so many techniques that it kind of depends on the situation. Does that answer your question?
yes, I was just wondering if you're always loading the same images for your responsive design, or if you make the decision to load smaller images when you're mobile.
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes we do serve up smaller images for the mobile devices. Sometimes we'll do, I want to get into the picture element. I feel like it's not quite there yet, but that's on my list of to-dos is to switch everything over to the picture element where you can have a nice easy fallback based on the device. So I think that's going to be the next thing for managing that kind of thing. Yeah?
I guess on that same note, how do you handle higher pixel density displays and daily reference displays with regular serving those up responsibly?
Yeah, that's a good question too. The pixel density displays is definitely a challenging thing because it's changing all the time. New devices come out with like even higher pixel density. It just gets crazy. So you just kind of have to roll with the punches on that one. I think still the picture element is going to help a lot with that. But we just serve up bigger images and shrink them down usually, just to kind of get around it, to try and get some crispness there. Icons, we use a font library for that, so it's nice and crisp at any size. But images, overall images, we just usually shrink them down. Anything else? All right, I think I have a final conclusion slide here somewhere. All right, that's it. Thanks.